And now I welcome Eleni Papadopoulou to the podium, who truly experiences these issues firsthand. Good evening. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for being here. I will be very brief. The title was The Effects of the European Union's and Greece's Immigration Policy on the Economy and Society, and the Case of Athens, which also ties in with what the previous speaker just discussed. I won't go through the full legislative history, it would be far too tedious, but I will focus on two key points. The first is the Marrakesh Pact of 2018. I'll be brief on this. I mention it because the Greek legislation that followed was essentially written based on this pact, and we have since been following it. So the Marrakesh Pact in 2018, back then we participated with the Syriza government. We voted for it. We agreed. We signed it. It was approved by 164 countries at the UN Global Conference. It is essentially the first global agreement by the United Nations for a common approach to international migration. They attempted and succeeded in imposing common rules on all countries, especially in the West, to achieve what? To essentially legitimize illegal immigration. That was the Marrakesh Pact, which stated that it was not legally binding. Nevertheless, we all know it's very easy to bind countries through funding. They found a way, and all countries have essentially been bound to it. That's why after 2018 we saw those large flows, though in 2015 we had them as well. They said they'd handle it, and in essence they managed it through the Marrakesh Pact from 2018 onward, and then both the EU and Greece adapted their laws. Previously, older laws criminalized illegal immigrants. Entering a country illegally was a violation of law. This pact tries to make them legal. Before, someone who entered illegally had no rights, not to schools, not to healthcare, not to anything. They simply didn't exist within the state. The EU had already begun trying to change that, but the Marrakesh Pact is what stated they have human rights too. So they enter illegally, yes, but with rights. That is the fundamental shift from 2018 onward. That's also when the term irregular migrant replaced illegal migrant, as discussed earlier. The Marrakesh Pact introduced the term irregular migrant because they claim migration is not a crime. Thus, no law is violated, so it's not illegal. It's irregular. Also, illegal doesn't sound very nice. It's considered racist. So they softened it to irregular, and suddenly it sounds much better. No law is broken, and we're not racists. The proponents of this pact believe that these flows contribute to society. They consider it something good, something positive. So we must treat them as if they were legal. Regarding labor, the pact explicitly states that countries must facilitate hiring of foreigners, strengthen their labor legislation with provisions for short-term and seasonal contracts. That's why we then saw new laws being introduced here too. Procedures were also introduced to eventually lead to legalization. They might enter irregularly, but the state must initiate processes to legalize them. The fact that so many asylum applications are granted is part of that logic. The process of obtaining asylum is a means of legalization. The laws were crafted to provide numerous types of residence permits to cover all scenarios, so that even the most borderline cases could be granted asylum. This all stems from the Marrakech Pact. It also prohibits arbitrary detentions. Arrests are no longer allowed. If you read older laws, illegal entry into the country meant you were arrested. Now, arrest is forbidden. If you ask the Coast Guard or those managing the borders, they'll tell you, we don't arrest. They are brought in. Only smugglers are arrested, if identified. They are the only ones prosecuted. The rest are taken to registration centers to begin the legalization process. That's the system we are living under now. Greek legislation has adapted accordingly. There were countries that rejected the Marrakech Pact and denounced it: Israel, Australia, Switzerland, Hungary, Poland, Austria. They did not participate. The United States under President Trump also abstained, saying, rightly, that only Americans would decide their immigration policies, no one else. And that's what other countries should have done. Imagine if Biden had been president then. We saw what happened later. The true goal of the 2018 Pact was to legalize illegal immigration. What was once unlawful became lawful. Once the pact was adopted, there began an unchecked, extremely favorable policy toward illegal migration. This happened despite terrorist attacks starting in 2015, Bataclan, etc., and by 2018 they still chose to sign this pact. The public, the people, are just collateral damage. They don't care. There is, however, increasing public pressure, and some governments have shifted to the right. So under this pressure, a new pact on migration and asylum was passed in 2024. It doesn't differ much. It's mostly window dressing, a way to show they tried to fix things. It's slightly stricter, but still carries the same influence. Its primary concern is preventing terrorist attacks. That's why there's great focus on Eurodac, the fingerprint identification system. They are looking at external border security. They want faster legalization procedures, supposed solidarity among EU countries. You've heard the rhetoric: shared responsibility, relocation. But no one wants to take in those arriving en masse in first reception countries. So, the solution now is this: either they accept a certain number of asylum seekers, or they pay €20,000 per rejected asylum seeker, or help fund border operations in pressured states. To date, no country has been fined. The status quo continues as each state looks after its own interests, except ours. What interests the EU in this pact is anything that happens once an asylum seeker reaches the EU's borders. They try to make deals with countries like Tunisia, Mauritania, Egypt to contain the flows. So far, there's been no result. The main difference from the previous, more lenient Marrakesh Pact is that under this new one, from 2024 onward, an asylum seeker can be detained for up to 12 weeks at the border. Before, this wasn't allowed. Now it's permitted up to 12 weeks. Detention is now legalized without extra conditions, but it's still not arrest or imprisonment. There are now common standards across the EU, even though countries don't face the same volume or kind of immigration. Some don't face any existential threat like we do from Turkey. Yet we must all follow the same migration policy. Why Calcis hasn't reacted, I don't understand. Countries cannot have a common migration policy because their problems are not the same. Dublin regulations haven't been abolished either. That's why we recently had the case with Germany, where the court allowed deportations back to Greece. Mr. Vortis said this violates the principle of proportional distribution in EU solidarity, but I don't think anyone will listen. To sum up before we move to Athens, everyone repeats the same things: borders, security, cooperation with other countries. It's all the same, again and again, with no real solution. In 2023, 1.1 million asylum applications were submitted in the EU, up 17% from the previous year. That's a huge problem. Global and European laws aim for a harmonized policy, trying to impose the same rules on all. But not all countries have the same issues. Every country looks out for itself, except ours, which prioritizes the EU's agenda. Now the consequences, and let's link this to the topic of Athens. First, with regard to Greek law, it was simply adapted. We had to comply with asylum and flow management legislation. The social consequences. Athens has become the command center of these operations. You know this already. As a municipal councillor in Athens, I see that NGOs run the city. Constant memoranda of cooperation with NGOs in every aspect. Illegal immigration is being legalized, as you yourselves can see in certain neighborhoods. We do indeed have population replacement, displacement of residents, ghettoization, degradation, criminality. Anyone visiting Athens can see this firsthand. Now, some photos of these neighborhoods. Let's also talk about the economic consequences, particularly housing and rent increases. Thousands of apartments have been given to illegal immigrants, either asylum applicants or workers in many of those thriving businesses mentioned earlier. The result, skyrocketing rents. Why? Because if 20 people live in a flat rented for 800 euros, the neighbor will want the same rent, then 1,000 euros and so on, because 20 people can pay it. That's why rents have risen. Not because of Airbnb or housing shortages, Athens is densely built. Many apartments are vacant. Those that aren't are rented to these populations. Programs like Estia and Helios provided thousands of free apartments or subsidized rent. They don't care if it costs 800 euros or 5,000 euros. They'll pay. The black market provides the means. As a result, property value declined. Whole neighborhoods were degraded. Rents went up. Legitimate entrepreneurs were pushed out due to unfair competition. Operating outside legal frameworks, these businesses can't be rivaled by Greeks. We now have black money, illegal laundromats, and pawn shops. Athens has become a magnet for illegality. On one side, you have the NGO headquarters. On the other, the gangs. Now to the photos. This is not just one balcony. It's many. Imagine looking out your window and seeing this. People live in shacks. This is reality. Some even live on balconies. Others sleep in courtyards. This is not one neighborhood. It's entire districts. And no one cares. Public health authorities ignore it. Police don't intervene. The state does nothing. From these apartments, I'd say all of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh has passed through. These aren't families staying 2 or 3 years. These are hotels. Huge parts of the city have been abandoned by the state, left to deteriorate. Here's a photo from a Sharnan street, where that hydrogen shop exploded. These are banned in residential areas. No one did anything. There are at least 10 more nearby. Despite the blast and massive property damage, nothing changed. Next, this is called Kavaltar. These are shops from another world. No customers, yet they survive. I live near Victoria Square. We never had so many mini markets, not even when families with purchasing power lived there. Now there's one on every corner. Other activities, collecting trash. Have you been to the OEC building? These photos aren't random. They're results of this policy. When someone is left in semi-legal status for years, they end up in crime, collecting trash, or drugs. These phenomena are not random. They are linked. Residents are rising up. These are locals from Agios Pavlos. A full protest took place. Mr. Dukas came about the drug problem near the OEC building. They said they'd fix it, then rented a new hotel for drug addicts for 2 million euros. That's 30,000 euros per day, with breakfast. It recently came before council. I want to make this public. Money flows freely to mini markets and other setups. Where do they get the money for all this inventory? Who buys it? Last photo, the mosque. This is a legal mosque inside the basement of an apartment building. Not from the street view, where riot police block roads when an Orthodox church is under construction. Urban planning won't even allow us to build a church underground. We need strict specs. But for them, every basement, every shop becomes a mosque. And what is a mosque? If you live next to one, you'll know. It's terrifying, especially for women. I personally was frightened twice exiting one. Only men attend, as you know. Like we gather around our church, they gather around their mosque. These become centers in every neighborhood. And it's frightening how easily and wherever they can open one. Thank you very much. Thank you for the excellent speech. Maybe it should be a prerequisite for anyone running for parliament to live in Agios Panteleimonas for 15 days. Maybe then they'd panic and finally deal with the people's problems. Let me add something I also said in my own speech. In those areas, Sharia prevails. There are walls with Arabic writing saying, "Here is Sharia." Sadly, this isn't in Islamabad or Mokattam, it's here in Athens. And unfortunately, the Athenian state resembles the Civil War era, where the government was just offices and the casinos around Syntagma Square, where Greek experts gambled away foreign aid. There is another Greece that we must wake up to. It is there, and it threatens us. If we don't act now, yesterday actually, we are doomed.